"Daddy." The voice was a wisp of sound, barely strong enough to push past the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. "Am I going to become an angel soon?" Damon Lowell's world, which had been slowly cracking for months, finally fractured. He looked down at his daughter, Ivy, a 7-year-old soul swimming in a hospital bed that was far too large for her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and a web of thin tubes tethered her to the machines that were supposed to be keeping her here on Earth. Her eyes, however, were the same as they'd always been, deep, knowing pools of chocolate brown that saw far too much. He swallowed the rock that had formed in his throat, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. He smoothed a stray strand of her dark hair from her forehead. "You're already an angel, sweetheart." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He was a janitor, a man who worked with his hands, who fixed what was broken. But he couldn't fix this. He couldn't fix the faulty valve in his daughter's heart, a ticking clock that no amount of scrubbing or polishing could silence. He could only watch and work and pray. Ivy seemed to accept his answer, her small hand tightening its grip on his finger. "Okay, Daddy. But if I do get wings, can they be blue? Like a butterfly?" "Whatever color you want, Ivy Bug," he whispered, leaning down to kiss her forehead. He stayed there until her breathing evened out, until the beeping of the monitor was the only sound in the sterile, white room. He stayed until the ghosts of his own failures backed away from the bedside, at least for a little while. Hours later, the smell of antiseptic had been replaced by the sterile scent of industrial cleaner. Damon pushed a wide bristled broom across the endless marble floor of the Cinder Spire's lobby. The building was a monument to a world he didn't belong in, a spear of glass and dark steel that pierced the night sky. By day, it hummed with the energy of 1,000 lives he would never know. CEOs, stockbrokers, lawyers. By night, it was his. A silent, empty kingdom of echoes and shadows. He worked with a quiet, practiced efficiency, his movements economical, his thoughts 1,000 miles away, back in that quiet hospital room. The squeak of his cart's wheels, the swish of the broom, the hum of the ventilation. It was the soundtrack to his desperation. Every dollar he earned was a drop in an ocean of medical debt. The experimental treatment Ivy was undergoing wasn't working as well as the doctors had hoped, and the next option, a highly specialized surgery, was a peak so high he couldn't even see the summit. Damon finished the lobby and wheeled his cart toward the service elevator, his reflection a tired, faded ghost in the polished chrome doors. He didn't go up. He pressed the button for the sub-basement, SB2. The elevator descended, sinking into the guts of the skyscraper, the air growing cooler, smelling of damp concrete and dust. Down here, the illusion of wealth and power was stripped away. There was no marble, only raw, poured concrete. No ambient lighting, just the harsh, pale glare of caged fluorescent bulbs. This was the building's skeleton, a place of pipes, wires, and forgotten things. It was also Damon's sanctuary. He pushed his cart to a far corner, behind a massive, dormant boiler. Tucked away on a dusty shelf was a small, unassuming cardboard box. Inside were sticks of charcoal, scavenged from the art department's trash on the 34th floor, and a roll of discarded architectural blueprints. He unrolled a large sheet, the crisp paper crinkling in the silence. On one side were the precise, clean lines of a support column schematic. Damon flipped it over to the blank side. He picked up a piece of charcoal, its rough texture familiar and comforting in his calloused fingers. And then he drew. He didn't think. He just let his hand move, channeling the ache in his chest onto the paper. Lines formed, curves softened, and slowly, a face emerged from the gray dust. Ivy's face. Not the pale, tired girl in the hospital bed, but the real Ivy, the one with the mischievous grin, the sprinkle of freckles across her nose, the light in her eyes that could outshine the whole damn city. He drew her mid-laugh, head thrown back, a memory from a day in the park that felt like a lifetime ago. This was his prayer. This was the only way he knew how to fight the darkness. Upstairs, on the 75th floor, Ilara Winslow stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, staring down at the city lights. They weren't stars to her, they were data points, assets, a kingdom she had built. The Cinder Spire was her masterpiece, a flawless structure born of ambition and an obsessive need for control. Every angle, every joint, every pane of glass was a testament to her will. Perfection was her armor. But tonight, the armor felt thin. An old anxiety, a familiar ghost, was whispering at the edges of her mind. It had been 10 years since the collapse, 10 years since she'd lost her younger brother Thomas to a rival developer's shoddy work. The memory was the wound that never healed, the reason she checked every blueprint 3 times, the reason she trusted no one, the reason she was still here at 2 a.m. Something was bothering her. A subtle vibration she'd felt in the elevator, a detail on a sub-basement structural plan that didn't sit right in her memory. She couldn't let it go. Pulling on a tailored blazer, she strode to the elevator and, like Damon an hour before her, descended into the building's depths. The sub-basement was exactly as she designed it, cold, functional, perfect. She ran a hand along a concrete support beam, her mind scrolling through stress calculations. It was then that she saw it. Tucked behind the boiler, a sheet of her own blueprint paper, weighted down with a brick. But it wasn't her precise lines she saw. It was the face of a little girl, rendered in charcoal with a skill that was raw, untaught, but breathtakingly real. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a soul on paper. A desperate, ferocious love radiated from the image, a love so powerful it felt like a physical force. It hit Ilara like a punch to the gut, cracking the perfect, sterile silence of her world. She stared at the portrait, her breath catching in her throat, a forgotten warmth spreading through her chest. Who was this girl? And who, in the heart of her perfect fortress, was the ghost who drew her? Ilara Winslow did not believe in ghosts. She believed in tensile strength, load-bearing capacities, and the immutable laws of physics. Ghosts were variables, imperfections, and she had designed a life devoid of them. Yet, the face of the girl staring up from the blueprint felt more real than the concrete beneath her designer heels. It was an impossible fusion of sorrow and joy, a testament to a love so profound it felt like a structural element of its own. Her first instinct was to remove it, to restore the sterile order of the sub-basement. It was, by definition, vandalism, unsanctioned, a flaw, but her hand wouldn't move. Taking it would feel like an erasure, like silencing a voice that had just begun to speak in a language she'd long forgotten. Instead, she took a photo with her phone, the clinical blue light of the screen a strange intrusion on the raw, dusty art. She looked around the cavernous space, at the silent pipes and dormant machinery. Someone had been here. Someone who saw this cold, functional space as a studio, a sanctuary. She backed away slowly, as if leaving the den of a timid, unseen animal. Back in the silent express elevator, ascending 77 floors in 40 seconds, she didn't look at the city. She stared at the photo on her phone. The girl's eyes seemed to follow her. Who was she? Ilara felt a strange, protective anger. An artist of this caliber shouldn't be hiding in a basement. They should be celebrated, funded, known. But a deeper, more selfish part of her wanted the secret to remain hers alone. It was a crack in her perfect fortress, but through that crack, for the first time in a decade, a little light was getting in. The next morning, Victor Garrick marched through the lobby of the Cinder Spire like a general reviewing his troops. His suit was immaculate, his shoes shone like black mirrors, and his face was set in a permanent mask of stern disapproval. To Victor, the building wasn't a work of art. It was a complex machine, and his sole purpose was to eliminate any friction that might disrupt its pristine operation. "Mendez," he barked at a day-shift janitor polishing a brass panel. I see a scuff mark on the marble by the west entrance. A scuff mark, Mendez. This is not a public gymnasium. It is a cathedral of commerce. See to it." He continued his patrol, his eyes scanning for imperfections. A misaligned plant, a fingerprint on the glass, a speck of dust. He was a man who derived his sense of importance from the trivialities he could control. His journey took him, as it did every Tuesday, to the sub-levels for a systems check. As he rounded the boiler in SB2, he stopped dead. He saw the blueprint, weighted down by a brick. He saw the girl's face, but Victor didn't see art. He saw graffiti, a defacement, a blatant violation of Building Code 117-B, which expressly forbade the application of any unapproved markings on company property. His face flushed with a deep, satisfying rage. Finally, a real problem to solve. A villain to vanquish. He wouldn't report it to Ms. Winslow. She was a conceptual person. She didn't need to be bothered with the grubby details of enforcement. No, he would handle this himself. He would catch this vandal and make an example of them. That evening, Damon's hands trembled slightly as he pushed his cart into the service elevator. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. All day, he'd been tormented by the image of his drawing being found, ripped up, and thrown away. He pictured a security guard finding it, then the building manager, then a call to his supervisor. He could lose this job. And if he lost this job, he lost everything. Ivy's treatment, the small apartment they barely held on to, it was all connected to this building. He stepped out into the sub-basement, his heart hammering against his ribs. He walked toward the corner, dreading what he would find. An empty space, a termination notice, a trap. He rounded the boiler and his breath caught. The drawing was still there, untouched. Exactly as he'd left it. A wave of relief so intense it made him dizzy washed over him. He knelt, his hand hovering over the paper. He'd been so lucky. It was a stupid risk. He should take it, burn it, and never, ever do it again. But then he saw it, next to the brick that held his drawing down. Placed neatly on the concrete floor was a flat black portfolio case. He stared at it, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. It hadn't been there last night. Hesitantly, he reached out and unzipped it. Inside was a pad of thick, cream-colored artist's paper, the kind with a texture that felt like a promise. Beneath it lay a professional set of charcoal pencils and compressed sticks, ranging from the palest silver gray to the deepest, richest black. It wasn't a trap. It was an offering. The fear returned. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the fear of being caught. It was the fear of being seen. Someone knew his secret, but they weren't reporting him. They were encouraging him. They were speaking to him in the only language that mattered. He thought of Ivy in the hospital that afternoon, her small voice telling him about a dream she'd had where she could fly over the city. Her heart all better. The doctors had used words like plateau and disappointing results. But Ivy had talked about flying. Damon looked from the expensive, clean paper to the dusty blueprint. He should walk away. He should stick to the shadows. Stay invisible. It was safer. But the feel of the new charcoal in his hand was electric. The blank page was a dare. Someone had seen his prayer for Ivy, and instead of throwing it away, they had handed him a hymnal. He carefully set his old drawing aside. He took a fresh sheet from the portfolio, its clean, perfect surface a stark contrast to his grimy reality. He picked up a stick of deep black charcoal, and with a breath that was half terror and half exultation, he began to draw again. He would draw Ivy flying. For Alara, the following day was a study in controlled distraction. She led a board meeting on quarterly revenue projections with her usual icy precision, dismantled a senior partner's flawed logistics proposal in under 5 minutes, and signed off on a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Yet, through it all, a part of her mind was far below, in the cold, silent concrete of the sub-basement. She found herself glancing at the clock. the slow crawl of the hours an unfamiliar torment. For the first time in her career, she was not anticipating the end of the workday, but the deep hush of the night that followed. At 1 a.m., she could wait no longer. The building was a tomb, the only sound the faint whisper of the air conditioning. She took the service elevator down, her heart beating with a strange, nervous rhythm she hadn't felt since she was a teenager. As she rounded the boiler, her breath caught. The portfolio case was open. The expensive charcoal set had been used, and in the center of the floor, weighted down by the same brick, was a new drawing. Ilara knelt, her knees touching the dusty concrete. This time, the girl was not laughing. She was soaring. Her eyes were closed in a state of peaceful ecstasy, her arms outstretched, her hair flowing behind her as if caught in a celestial wind. The city skyline was sketched faintly below her, a world she was rising above. The artist had used the richer, darker charcoals to create a sense of infinite velvety space around her, making the girl's form, rendered in softer grays, seem luminous. It wasn't a portrait of grief. It was a portrait of escape, of hope so fierce it defied gravity. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her swept through Ilara. It was the hope she herself had crushed years ago, the day she buried Thomas. She had traded hope for control, and looking at this drawing, she felt the poverty of that exchange. Very carefully she lifted the first drawing, the one on the blueprint, and slid it into her own portfolio. She would keep it safe. She left the new drawing of the flying girl, a silent message that the exchange was accepted. The next afternoon, Damon sat by Ivy's bed, trying to coax her into eating a few spoonfuls of pudding. She was weaker today, the circles under her eyes a deeper shade of purple. "I don't want it, Daddy," she murmured, turning her head on the pillow. "Just a little bit, Ivy Bug," he pleaded softly. "For me, it's your favorite. Chocolate fudge volcano." She gave him a tiny, tired smile. "You made that name up." "I did," he admitted. "But it sounds better than nutritional supplement, don't you think?" She managed one spoonful before pushing it away. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the steady, monotonous beep of the monitor. "Does it hurt to get wings?" she asked, her voice quiet. Damon's hand froze mid-air. He looked at her, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "The angels," she said, her gaze distant. "When they get their wings, does it hurt their back?" He fought to keep his voice steady. "No, honey, I don't think it hurts at all. I think it feels like you're finally letting go of something heavy you've been carrying." Ivy seemed to consider this. "Okay," she whispered, and closed her eyes. Damon sat there long after she'd fallen asleep, her question echoing in the silent room, a new crack forming in his already broken heart. That night, Victor Garrick was a man on a mission. He spent 2 hours in the security office, fast-forwarding through footage from the service elevator lobby. He saw the usual night crew, cleaners, a few maintenance workers, Damon Lowell pushing his cart. He watched Lowell get into the elevator, but the sub-basement levels had no cameras. A budget oversight, he'd argued at the time. Now, it was a maddening blind spot. "Useless," he muttered, rewinding the footage. He watched Damon Lowell again. A quiet man, always kept to himself. Head down, did his work, never caused any trouble. He was almost invisible. Victor's eyes narrowed. Sometimes, the most invisible people were the ones with the most to hide. He made a note. Lowell, Damon, night janitor, person of interest. He would make his own patrols tonight. Unscheduled, unannounced. When Damon arrived in the sub-basement for his shift, he saw it immediately. The first drawing was gone. In its place, the drawing of Ivy flying was laid out perfectly. He knelt, his fingers tracing the edge of the fine paper. So this was the arrangement. An exchange. He created something, and his silent benefactor took it, leaving a blank space for him to fill again. He felt a bizarre sense of connection to this stranger. They didn't know his name, his story, his pain. But they saw him. In the loneliest building in the world, someone saw him. Miles above, in her penthouse office, Ilara had carefully pinned the blueprint drawing to a large corkboard she kept hidden behind a sliding panel of polished mahogany. She'd spent an hour just looking at it, at the raw power in the lines. As her eyes scanned the familiar schematic on the other side, something caught her attention. Near the bottom corner, next to the architect's stamp, her stamp, was a tiny, almost imperceptible detail. It was a doodle, no bigger than a thumbnail, drawn in what looked like a soft pencil. It was a perfect, delicate butterfly. Beneath it, a single, smudged fingerprint in charcoal dust. A butterfly. The image resonated with a strange familiarity, though she couldn't place why. It was such a small, human touch on a cold, technical document. A moment of whimsy from the same hand that could render a child's soul in charcoal. It was another piece of the puzzle, another breadcrumb leading her deeper into the mystery of the ghost in her machine. She touched the tiny drawing, a ghost of a smile on her own lips. The artist wasn't just grieving, they were dreaming too. The exchange continued for 2 weeks, a silent, secret ritual in the heart of the skyscraper. Damon would arrive to find a blank sheet of pristine paper waiting for him, and he would leave a piece of his soul on it. He drew Ivy telling him a secret, her small hand cupped by her mouth. He drew her mesmerized by a snail on a leaf in the park. Each drawing was a stolen moment of beauty, a defiance against the sterile beeping of the machines. And each morning, Ilara would find his offering and take the previous day's work, adding it to the growing collection on her secret corkboard. Her office, once a temple to corporate austerity, now housed a hidden shrine to a janitor's love for his daughter. But the ghost had a hunter. Victor Garrick had become a predator stalking the building's quiet corridors. He varied his patrol times, took unexpected routes, and developed a habit of appearing out of nowhere with a tight, knowing smile. He'd taken to engaging Damon in small talk, his questions casual but pointed. "Working late again, Lowell?" he'd asked one night, appearing suddenly behind Damon in the 45th floor kitchen. Damon nearly dropped the sponge in his hand. "Just finishing up, Mr. Garrick." "Good, good. Diligence is a virtue," Garrick said, his eyes scanning Damon as if looking for smudges of charcoal. "You have a family, Lowell?" "A daughter," Damon replied, his voice tight. Garrick nodded slowly. "Must be tough, working nights. Hope she's not the type to get into trouble. Drawing on walls, that sort of thing." Damon's blood ran cold. He kept his expression blank, his gaze fixed on the sink. "No, sir. She's a good kid." "They always are," Garrick said, before turning and walking away, his footsteps echoing on the tile. The threat was no longer implied. It was hanging in the air between them. The close call came on a Tuesday. Damon was deep in the sub-basement, completely absorbed. He was drawing Ivy as she slept, trying to capture the profound peace on her face that he so rarely saw when she was awake. The charcoal whispered across the paper. In this quiet, dusty space, he could almost forget the relentless beep of the heart monitor. He could pretend she was just a little girl, dreaming sweet dreams in her own bed. A sound. The distant metallic clang of a door shutting on the level above. Damon froze, every muscle tensed. It was probably just the building settling, or a maintenance worker on another floor. But Garrick's words echoed in his head. He listened, holding his breath. Then he heard it again, closer this time. The soft squeak of rubber soles on concrete. Panic seized him. In a fluid, desperate motion, he gathered the drawing and the art supplies, shoving them into the portfolio. He scrambled behind a bank of rusted, defunct electrical cabinets, pulling his knees to his chest and making himself as small as possible. The darkness swallowed him just as a beam of light cut through the gloom. Victor Garrick stepped into the space, a heavy-duty flashlight in his hand. The beam sliced through the air, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stillness. It swept across the boiler, the pipes, and the empty corner where Damon's drawing had been moments before. "I know you're here," Garrick said, his voice a low, confident growl. "Don't make this difficult." Damon held his breath until his lungs burned. He could hear his own heart pounding, a frantic drum against the silence. Garrick took another slow step, his flashlight beam sliding across the front of the electrical cabinets. For a terrifying second, the light illuminated the toe of Damon's worn boot. Damon pressed himself further into the shadows, his mind screaming. But Garrick's attention was on the floor. He knelt, his beam focused on the concrete. "Ah," he whispered. A faint dusting of charcoal powder, almost invisible, remained where Damon had been working. Evidence. Getting warmer. Garrick chuckled to himself. He stood, swept the beam around one last time, and then left, his footsteps receding into the distance. Damon didn't move for 10 minutes. He stayed crouched in the dark, shaking, the drawing of his sleeping daughter clutched to his chest. Meanwhile, Ilara's obsession had led her to the one place she never went: human resources. She'd fabricated a story about a new employee recognition initiative, a flimsy excuse to gain access to the personnel files for the building's night staff. The HR manager, a woman flustered by the CEO's sudden interest in janitors, had handed over the files with trembling hands. Ilara sat at her vast mahogany desk, flipping through the thin manila folders. They were mostly anonymous data: names, addresses, social security numbers. Then she opened the file for Damon Lowell. It was just as sparse as the others. Hired 6 months ago. No disciplinary actions. Address in a low-income part of the city. Then her eyes landed on a small box at the bottom of the form: Dependents Emergency Contacts. There was only one entry: Ivy Lowell, daughter. Ivy. The name hit her with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted on its axis. The ghost had a name. The drawings, the love, the sorrow. It was all for a little girl named Ivy. The faceless janitor from the security footage suddenly had a face, a life, a reason. The art wasn't an act of rebellion or boredom. It was an act of survival. She leaned back in her chair, the file resting in her hands. She thought of the drawing of the girl flying, of the fierce, desperate hope in every line. It was Damon's hope for his daughter, Ivy. A cold, unfamiliar feeling washed over her, a fierce, protective instinct. This man, this father, was creating beauty in the darkness, and his toad of a manager was trying to crush him for it. Later that night, after his shift, a shaken but resolute Damon returned to the sub-basement. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a new defiance. He wouldn't let Garrick scare him away from the one thing that kept him sane. He took out the drawing of Ivy sleeping and finished it, his strokes more deliberate than ever. But tonight, he did something he hadn't done before. He tore a small, clean corner from an old blueprint and wrote on it with a charcoal pencil. It was a risk, but he had to acknowledge the other person in his secret world. He left the new drawing in the usual spot. Beside it, he placed the note. It contained only 2 words: "Thank you." When Ilara descended to the basement later, the first thing she saw was the new portrait. Ivy, asleep and at peace. It was so beautiful it ached. Then she saw the small, folded piece of paper. Her hand shook as she picked it up and read the 2 simple words. The neat, careful handwriting of a man who wasn't used to being given anything. The ghost had a name, and now he had a voice. Ilara held the note to her chest, the fragile paper a bridge between their 2 solitary worlds. She knew his name. She knew his daughter's name, but he didn't know hers. She had a choice to make. Ilara held the small note in her hand as if it were a fragile artifact. "Thank you." 2 words, written in the hesitant script of a man unaccustomed to gratitude, had breached defenses that corporate takeovers and market crashes never could. She looked from the note to the drawing of the sleeping girl, Ivy. The peace on the child's face was a stark contrast to the storm of emotion brewing inside Alara. For 10 years, she had lived by a simple code: control everything, feel nothing. It had made her powerful, successful, and profoundly lonely. This janitor, this father, had unintentionally held up a mirror to her gilded cage, and she no longer liked the reflection. The immediate threat wasn't a market competitor. It was a petty tyrant named Victor Garrick who saw a father's love as vandalism. She couldn't let him win. Her decision was swift and absolute. She would not remain a ghost, but she would not reveal herself either. Not yet. First, she would change the rules of the game. She returned to her office, the drawing and the note safely in her portfolio. She sat at her desk, pulled out a sheet of her personal, cream-colored stationery, thick paper embossed with a simple, elegant W, and wrote her own reply. She considered several phrases before settling on 4 simple words. She folded the note, her movements precise and deliberate. Next, she drafted an email. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, composing a memo that was a masterpiece of corporate misdirection. The subject line read, "Initiative Launch, the Cinder Spire Organic Art Project." The body of the email detailed a new, cutting-edge corporate wellness program designed to foster creativity and humanize the workspace through anonymous, in-situ artistic installations. It spoke of embracing disruptive creativity and turning the building itself into a living gallery. It was utter nonsense, but it was nonsense, cloaked in the kind of aspirational jargon that board members loved. She addressed it to all senior management, with a special carbon copy sent directly to Victor Garrick. She hit send, with a grim smile. The trap was set. Damon's shift began with a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He'd spent the day replaying his close call with Garrick, the memory of the flashlight beam searing his mind. Leaving the note had felt necessary in the moment, a desperate reach across the void. But now it felt reckless. What if it was seen as a confession? He did his work on the upper floors with a new sense of dread, feeling Garrick's eyes on him even when he wasn't there. Finally, he descended to his sanctuary in the sub-basement, his heart pounding. The drawing of Ivy sleeping was gone. In its place was the familiar portfolio and a fresh sheet of paper, and resting on top of it was a small, elegant note. His hands, rough and calloused from work, trembled as he picked it up. The paper felt impossibly smooth, expensive. He unfolded it. The handwriting was sharp, confident, and elegant. It read, "She is beautiful. Don't stop." Damon read the words again, and then a third time. A wave of emotion so intense it made him lean against the boiler for support washed over him. It wasn't just a thank you, it was validation. It was encouragement. It was a command. Don't stop. In the face of his fear, in the face of Garrick's threats, this unseen stranger was telling him to be brave. A tear he didn't know he was holding back slid down his cheek and splattered onto the concrete floor. An hour later, as he was cleaning the restrooms on the 22nd floor, Garrick cornered him. Damon straightened up from the sink, bracing himself for the inevitable. This was it. He was going to be fired. But Garrick didn't look triumphant. He looked apoplectic, his face a blotchy, furious red. He shoved a printed-out piece of paper into Damon's chest. "CEO's new pet project," Garrick spat, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "Read it." Damon took the paper. It was the memo. His eyes scanned the corporate jargon. Organic art project, in-situ installations, disruptive creativity. He didn't understand half of the words, but he understood the meaning. The art, his art, was now officially sanctioned, protected. "Looks like your little hobby is now considered corporate-sanctioned art," Garrick sneered, his lip curling. "Some of us see it for what it is, a mess. But the view from the 75th floor must be different." He jabbed a finger at Damon's chest. "Don't think for a second this changes anything between us. I'm still watching you, Lowell." Every move, Garrick turned and stormed away, his immaculate shoes squeaking with fury. Damon stood alone in the hallway, the memo clutched in his hand. He was safe. The weight that had been crushing him for weeks suddenly lifted. He was free to draw, to create, without fear. His anonymous patron, his guardian, wasn't just an art lover. They were powerful, powerful enough to silence Victor Garrick with a single email, powerful enough to bend the rules of the entire building. He looked down at the memo, then slowly lifted his gaze. He looked past the ceiling tiles, past the floors of offices and law firms, his eyes tracing an invisible line up the spine of the skyscraper. Up to the penthouse levels, up to where the real power resided. This was no longer a simple, secret exchange. This was something else entirely. And for the first time, Damon Lowell allowed himself to wonder not just who his protector was, but why. Why would someone so powerful care about the scribbled prayers of a janitor in a basement? With Garrick neutralized, a strange new freedom settled over Damon. The sub-basement, once a hiding place, now felt like a private studio gifted to him by a mysterious benefactor. The fear of discovery was gone, replaced by a quiet, burning curiosity. Who was this person who saw his heart on paper and chose to protect it? His art transformed. The desperate prayer-like quality receded, and in its place, something brighter began to bloom. He spent an entire night on a new piece, the high-quality charcoal feeling like a natural extension of his hand. He drew Ivy sitting on a park bench, bathed in sunlight, a dandelion puff held up to her lips, ready to make a wish. He captured the tiny seeds taking flight, the unrestrained joy in her eyes, the sheer, simple beauty of a happy moment. It was the most hopeful thing he had ever drawn. When he left it for his patron, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Ilara found the drawing of the girl with the dandelion and felt a smile touch her lips, a genuine, unforced expression that felt foreign on her own face. The shift in the art was palpable. The joy was no longer a memory being clung to. It was a living, breathing thing. She had done this. By creating a shield around him, she had allowed this fragile hope to flourish. The feeling was a heady mix of pride and something else, something warmer and more complicated. She took the drawing back to her office and pinned it next to the others. The corkboard was becoming a narrative, the story of a father and a daughter, told in shades of gray. She found herself spending more time in front of it than she did her own financial projections. The girl, Ivy, felt like someone she knew. Ilara saw the ghost of her brother Thomas in Ivy's smile, a flash of the same carefree spirit. The thought was an unexpected pang in her chest. The illusion of peace was shattered by the shrill ring of Damon's phone midway through his shift. He was polishing the brass fixtures outside the 50th floor law offices, the city lights twinkling below, and for a moment, he had felt almost content. The caller ID read Saint, Jude's pediatric. His blood went cold. Mr. Lowell? It was Dr. Eris, Ivy's primary physician. Her voice was gentle, which was always a bad sign. I'm sorry to call so late, but we need to talk. Ivy had a difficult night. Her oxygen saturation levels dropped, and she had a significant arrhythmia. Damon leaned against the wall, the brass polish rag slipping from his hand. Is she okay? She's stable now, Dr. Eris said. But there was a but hanging in the air. Damon, the experimental regimen isn't working. In fact, her cardiac function has declined over the past 48 hours. We need to officially discontinue it. The floor seemed to drop out from under him. Number, we just need more time. Time isn't on our side, the doctor said softly, her voice full of a pity Damon couldn't stand. I think it's time we seriously discuss the surgical option, the V-stent procedure. I know we've talked about the cost, but right now, it's her only viable path forward. Damon closed his eyes, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear. The cost. It might as well have been a ticket to the moon. He mumbled something, a thank you, a promise to be there first thing in the morning, and hung up. He stood frozen in the silent, opulent hallway. the doctor's words echoing in his ears. Her only viable path forward. A path he couldn't afford to put her on. The brief, sunlit world he had started to build crumbled into dust. He didn't remember cleaning anything else. He found himself back in the sub-basement, the portfolio of beautiful paper feeling like a cruel joke. Hope was a luxury, and he was bankrupt. He tore a fresh sheet from the pad, his movements jerky and rough. His hands were shaking, his vision blurred by tears he refused to let fall. He drew not from memory this time, but from the raw, searing terror of the present. He sketched Ivy's hand, small and delicate, swallowed by the plastic and tape of an IV line. He drew the thin tube snaking away, connecting her to a world of machines and medicine he couldn't control. He poured all of his helplessness, his rage, his fear into the piece. The lines were sharp, angry. The shadows were deep and consuming. It was not a prayer. It was a scream. When Alara came down later that night, she was expecting another sun-drenched moment. Instead, she found the scream. She saw the drawing of the small hand, the medical tubing, the overwhelming sense of fragility and despair. The joyful image of the girl with the dandelion was still fresh in her mind, and the whiplash between the two pieces knocked the air from her lungs. This wasn't just a shift in mood. This was a catastrophe. She stared at the drawing, her mind racing. Something had happened. Something terrible. This wasn't an anonymous artist creating abstract beauty anymore. This was a father, Damon, watching his daughter, Ivy, slip away. And she was standing here, in the dark, a silent observer. A ghost. The memory of her brother's funeral rose unbidden. The platitudes from her parents' friends, the hollow condolences, the feeling of utter, helpless rage. She had promised herself she would never feel that powerless again. She had built an empire to prove it. But what was the point of all her power, all her control, if she stood by and did nothing while a little girl's life hung in the balance? The anonymity that had felt like a clever game now felt like cowardice. The notes, the art supplies, they were meaningless gestures in the face of real suffering. Her decision was not a thought. It was a chemical reaction, a fundamental shift in her being. Her walls didn't just crack, they imploded. She turned, leaving the heart-wrenching drawing where it lay. She strode toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the concrete with a new, urgent rhythm. The silent correspondence was over. She would not be a ghost in this story any longer. She was going to find Damon Lowell, and she was going to do it tonight. Ilara strode out of the service elevator on the ground floor, her mission clear and sharp in her mind. The lobby, usually a place of quiet, echoing grandeur at this hour, felt charged with her newfound purpose. She bypassed the gleaming reception desk and headed straight for the security office, a small, brightly lit room tucked away behind a pane of one-way glass. Frank, the senior night guard, nearly jumped out of his skin when she entered. He was a portly man in his late 50s, and in his 20 years of working security, he'd never seen the CEO in his office. He scrambled to his feet, fumbling with a half-eaten donut in his hand.
"Miss Winslow? Is everything all right?"
"Everything is fine, Frank," Ilara said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that left no room for argument. "I need you to locate one of the night janitors for me. Damon Lowell. Where is he right now?" Frank, flustered, turned to his bank of monitors. He clicked a mouse, bringing up the night crew's cleaning schedule. Lowell. Let's see. It's 2:15 a.m. He should be on the 68th floor, the Sterling Thorne legal offices." He pointed to a screen showing a long, empty hallway. "That's the main corridor cam. Find him," Ilara commanded. Frank's fingers tapped nervously on the keyboard, switching between camera feeds. He found him in a large, dark boardroom. A lone figure, silhouetted against the vast window overlooking the glittering city. Damon wasn't cleaning. He was just standing there, his cart forgotten behind him, staring out at the world below. There he is, ma'am. Good, Ilara said. Stay here. Do not radio him. Do not alert anyone else. Understand? Yes, Ms. Winslow, Frank squeaked, sinking back into his chair as she turned and walked out. Damon felt like he was floating, disconnected from his own body. He should have been wiping down the massive oak table, emptying the trash bins. Instead, he stood before the window, his forehead pressed against the cool glass. Each light in the city below represented a life, a home, a family. How many of them were sitting by a hospital bed? How many of them were facing an impossible choice? He felt profoundly, utterly alone, a ghost in a machine much bigger than this building. He was so lost in his despair he didn't hear the soft click of the boardroom door opening. Damon Lowell. The voice, quiet and feminine but laced with steel, cut through his haze. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. A woman stood by the door, impeccably dressed in a dark blazer and slacks, her posture radiating an effortless power. He recognized her instantly from the photos in the lobby. Ilara Winslow, the CEO, the woman who had built this tower from the ground up. His mind raced. Garrick. He'd gone over Garrick's head. This was it, the end. His hands felt clumsy, and he instinctively reached for his cart, as if the act of cleaning could somehow protect him. I'm sorry, ma'am, he stammered. I was just taking a moment. Ilara took a step into the room, letting the door close softly behind her. She wasn't looking at his cart or his uniform. Her gaze was fixed on his face, her expression unreadable. She held up a small, folded piece of cream-colored paper. His breath hitched. It was her note. She is beautiful, Ilara said, her voice softer now. Ivy. Damon stared at her, his mind refusing to connect the dots. The CEO of the building, the elegant stationery, the corporate memo, the art supplies. It was all her. The powerful, mysterious benefactor was the queen of this entire kingdom. It didn't make any sense. You? He whispered, the single word full of disbelief. Yes, she said simply. I'm the one you've been leaving the drawings for. She took another step closer. The air between them felt electric. I saw your new piece tonight, in the basement. Her eyes softened with a flicker of something he couldn't name, not pity, something closer to empathy. What happened, Damon? The question was a key turning a lock he didn't know was rusted shut. The directness of it, the genuine concern in her voice, broke through his shock and his fear. The dam of his carefully controlled grief finally burst. They called, he said, his own voice sounding distant and broken. The hospital, the treatment, it's not working. She's getting worse. The words came out in a torrent, a confession to the only person who had shown him an ounce of human kindness in this cold glass tower. There's a surgery, a procedure, but the cost it's impossible. It's a number I can't even imagine, and it's her only chance. He finally looked away from her, back toward the window, his shoulders slumping in defeat. It's her only chance, and I can't give it to her. He expected a polite, empty phrase. I'm so sorry to hear that. Or, my thoughts are with you. Something a CEO says before moving on. Instead, Ilara stood in silence for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was clear and devoid of any artifice. It was the voice of a person who solved problems. What is the name of the surgery? He blinked, confused by the question. The V-stent aortic insertion. And how much does it cost? He laughed, a short, bitter sound. More than this building is worth to me. $500,000, give or take. Ilara didn't flinch. She simply nodded, as if he'd just quoted the price of a new office chair. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw past the CEO. He saw the woman who had doodled a butterfly, the woman who had understood his drawings without needing a single word of explanation. Go back to the hospital, Damon, she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Be with your daughter. But my shift. Your shift is over, she said. Go. She paused, then delivered the words that would reboot his entire world. Don't worry about the money. I'll take care of it. First thing in the morning, I want you to have the hospital's financial director call my office. I'll handle everything. Damon just stared at her, his mouth agape. The words registered, but the meaning was too vast to comprehend. It was like a homeless man being handed the keys to a kingdom. He tried to speak, to ask why, to say thank you, but no sounds came out. Ilara saw the stunned disbelief on his face. You gave this building a soul, Mr. Lowell, she said softly. Let me help you save yours. She turned and left him standing alone in the dark boardroom, the city lights glittering behind him like a sea of impossible promises, one of which, it seemed, had just come true. Damon stood motionless in the boardroom for a full 5 minutes after Ilara left. The silence she left behind was louder than any sound he had ever heard. The words, "I'll take care of it," echoed in the vast, empty space, refusing to be dismissed as a dream. He looked at his hands, then at his worn janitor's uniform, then out at the billion-dollar view. Nothing made sense. Slowly, as if coming out of a trance, he turned and walked out of the room. He didn't just leave the boardroom, he abandoned his entire shift. He pushed past his cleaning cart, its wheels giving a sad little squeak of protest. He walked down the empty hallway, took the service elevator to the ground floor, and strode out of the building's grand entrance, not the loading dock he usually used. The cool night air hit his face, a shock that proved he was awake. The world felt tilted, unreal. He didn't go home. He went straight to the hospital, the promise of a stranger, a powerful, benevolent ghost, lighting his way through the dark city streets. He spent the rest of the night in the uncomfortable chair beside Ivy's bed, not sleeping, just watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. The steady beep of the monitor was no longer a death knell. It was a rhythm of hope, a fragile, electronic heartbeat he now had a chance to save. He held her small, warm hand, the same hand he had drawn in anguish just hours before, and for the first time in a very long time, he allowed himself to imagine a future. The next morning, sleep-deprived and running on a mixture of cheap coffee and sheer adrenaline, Damon found Dr. Eris. With her at his side, he walked into the office of the hospital's financial director, a severe-looking woman named Mrs. Albright, whose gaze seemed to calculate a person's net worth on sight. Damon's voice trembled as he explained. A private benefactor has offered to cover the costs for Ivy's surgery. Mrs. Albright's eyebrows rose with undisguised skepticism. A private benefactor? Mr. Lowell, we're talking about a procedure that costs upwards of $500,000. We require legally binding financial commitments, not vague promises. I know, Damon said, his cheeks flushing. He felt like an imposter. Her name is Ilara Winslow. She's the CEO of Winslow Corp. She said to have you call her personal office. She's expecting the call. The name landed in the sterile office with a soft thud. Mrs. Albright's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious interest. Ilara Winslow was not a vague promise. She was one of the city's most powerful figures. The director looked at Damon, then at Dr. Eris, and picked up the phone. At that same moment, Ilara sat in her penthouse office. The sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She wasn't reviewing quarterly reports. She was staring at her secret gallery, at the charcoal faces of Ivy Lowell. Her personal assistant buzzed through on the intercom. Ms. Winslow, a Mrs. Albright from St. Jude's Pediatric Financial Office is on line 1 for you. Put her through, David, Ilara said calmly. She picked up the receiver. This is Ilara Winslow. The conversation was brief. Mrs. Albright, her tone now deferential, explained the situation. Ilara listened patiently. That's correct, Ilara said when she had finished. I will be guaranteeing all costs associated with Ivy Lowell's V-stent aortic insertion, as well as any and all related post-operative and follow-up care. Please have your finance department email the relevant account information to my assistant, David. He will facilitate a wire transfer for the full estimated amount within the hour. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The full amount? Ms. Winslow, that is there anything else I can help you with, Mrs. Albright? Ilara asked, her voice polite but firm, cutting off the sputtering. No, Ms. Winslow. Thank you. Excellent, Ilara said. Keep me updated on the child's progress. She hung up the phone. She looked at the drawing of Ivy with a dandelion puff, a silent promise passing between the powerful CEO and the image of the sick little girl. Back in the hospital office, Mrs. Albright slowly placed the phone back in its cradle. She looked at Damon, her professional mask of severity completely gone, replaced by an expression of pure astonishment. "The funds are being transferred," she said, her voice a near whisper. "The surgery is fully funded. It's approved." She cleared her throat, regaining some of her composure. "Dr. Aris will begin the pre-op assessments immediately. We can schedule the procedure for as soon as Ivy is strong enough." The words, "fully funded," "approved," hit Damon with the force of a physical wave. The tension he had been carrying in his shoulders for months, the crushing weight of his helplessness, simply evaporated. His knees buckled, and he sank into a chair, dropping his head into his hands as a sob of pure, unadulterated relief tore through him. He wept, not with sorrow, but with the kind of profound gratitude that feels like being reborn. That night, Damon Lowell returned to the cinder spire. He didn't clock in. He didn't get his cart. He walked straight to the service elevator and descended into the sub-basement. He was not there as a janitor. He was there as an artist with a debt to pay that money could never cover. He opened the portfolio his benefactor had left him. He took out the largest, cleanest sheet of paper. He needed to thank her, and he knew words would never be enough. How do you thank someone for giving you back your world? He began to draw. This time, he didn't draw Ivy alone. He sketched her small, delicate form, standing in a field of wildflowers. On her shoulder rested a single, perfect butterfly. Her hand, the same one he had drawn shackled to an IV, was now outstretched, reaching for the hand of a tall, elegant woman. Her face was not clearly defined, more an impression of strength and grace than a portrait. But there was no mistaking who she was. She was the guardian, the ghost from the penthouse, the angel who had answered a prayer he didn't even know how to speak. He drew for hours, lost in the work, pouring every ounce of his awe and gratitude into the charcoal lines. This was more than a drawing. It was an offering, a testament to the moment his life and Ivy's had been touched by grace. Ilara didn't know what to expect when she descended into the sub-basement the following night. A part of her thought the space would be empty, that their strange, silent ritual was over now that their worlds had collided in the harsh light of reality. Instead, she found a new drawing waiting for her, and it stopped her heart. It wasn't just a portrait. It was a myth, a fairy tale rendered in charcoal. A small girl, unmistakably Ivy, stood in a field of wildflowers, a butterfly resting on her shoulder. Her hand was outstretched, not in need, but in offering, reaching for the hand of a tall, graceful woman. The woman's face was a soft, indistinct blur, but her form was a beacon of strength and light. Ilara stared, her hand rising to cover her mouth. He had drawn her, not as a CEO, not as a woman in a power suit, but as a guardian angel. He had seen past her armor, past the walls she had spent a decade building, and captured an essence of herself she didn't know existed. In his gratitude, he had given her a gift far more profound than the money she had provided. He had given her a new reflection, recasting her from the helpless sister who had watched her brother die into the powerful protector who could shelter a child. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unfamiliar. She gently rolled up the drawing, a treasure she would keep forever. 2 weeks later, Damon sat in the sterile beige waiting room of the surgical wing. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken fear. Ivy had been in the operating room for 6 hours. 6 hours, 7 minutes, and 23 seconds. Damon had tracked every single one of them on the large, unforgiving clock on the wall. He had drunk 7 cups of bitter coffee, paced a trench in the worn linoleum, and read the same page of a tattered magazine 100 times without absorbing a single word. The waiting room door swished open. He didn't look up, expecting another nurse on a routine check. "I thought you might need this." He froze. He knew that voice. He looked up to see Alara Winslow standing before him, holding out a fresh cup of coffee. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in simple gray trousers and a soft cashmere sweater. She looked smaller, more human, without the skyscraper as her backdrop. "Miss Winslow," he breathed, scrambling to his feet. You didn't have to come." "Call me Alara," she said, pressing the cup into his hands. "And yes, I did." She sat in the chair beside him, her presence a quiet, solid anchor in his swirling sea of panic. They didn't speak for a long time. There were no adequate words. Finally, Alara broke the silence, her voice low. "The worst part is the quiet," she said, staring at the clock. "When you know their entire world is noise and machines and voices, and all you have is the silence." She paused. "I waited 11 hours for news about my brother. He never came out." Damon looked at her, truly seeing the ghost that haunted her eyes. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "He would have liked your drawings," she said, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "He was the artist in the family." In that moment, the last vestiges of their former dynamic, CEO and janitor, benefactor and recipient, crumbled away. They were just 2 people sitting in a hospital waiting room, bound by a shared understanding of love and the terror of loss. Back at the cinder spire, Victor Garrick was simmering. Damon Lowell hadn't shown up for work in 2 weeks. No call, no notice. It was a flagrant violation, the final nail in the janitor's coffin. Convinced the CEO had lost interest in her pet project, Garrick saw his chance to restore order. He marched down to the sub-basement, intent on clearing out the corner, confiscating the art supplies, and erasing any trace of the janitor's messy, unsanctioned creativity. He rounded the boiler and stopped. There, resting against the wall, was a single, large drawing, the one Damon had created of Ivy and her guardian angel, left behind in his haste and emotion. Garrick stared at it, his piggy eyes widening as the pieces clicked into place. The girl, the janitor's daughter, and the tall, powerful woman, Ms. Winslow. The anonymous artist and the janitor were the same man, and the CEO's interest was not just professional, it was personal. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered it, his hand trembling slightly. "Garrick." Ilara's voice was pure ice. She was on speakerphone, a nurse having just given her a 30-second update. "I've been told you're in the sub-basement. Don't touch that drawing. Don't touch anything. Your employment at the Cinder Spire is terminated, effective immediately. Frank will escort you from the building." She hung up. The waiting room door swished open again. This time, it was a woman in blue scrubs, her face tired but smiling. It was Dr. Aris. Damon shot to his feet, his heart seizing. Ilara stood with him. "The V-stent is in place," Dr. Aris said, her smile widening. "The procedure was a complete success. Her new valve is functioning perfectly. She's a fighter, that one. She's in recovery. Everything went as well as we could have possibly hoped." The world exploded into light and sound for Damon. A sob of pure, unadulterated joy escaped him, and he staggered back, catching himself on the wall. He was laughing and crying at the same time, the raw, overwhelming force of his relief too powerful to contain. Ilara simply placed a steadying hand on his arm, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. An hour later, they let him in to see her. Ivy was small and pale in the recovery bed, hooked up to new machines that beeped with a strong, steady, reassuring rhythm. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice groggy. "I'm here, Ivy Bug," he choked out, taking her hand. "I'm right here." He kissed her fingers, her forehead, his tears of gratitude watering the parched desert of his fear. Elara watched from the doorway, a quiet, profound peace settling over her. She had built a tower that touched the sky, but she had never built anything as real or as important as this moment. Feeling like her part was done, she began to turn, to slip away, and leave the family to their reunion. But Damon looked up, his eyes meeting hers over Ivy's sleeping form. His gaze was filled with a lifetime of gratitude, a question, and a plea. It was a look that said, "This is your victory too." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward the empty chair on the other side of Ivy's bed. He was asking her to stay. Elara hesitated for only a heartbeat. The invitation in Damon's eyes was too genuine to refuse. She walked quietly into the recovery room, the soft beep of the heart monitor a steady, reassuring song. She took the vinyl chair on the other side of Ivy's bed, the space between her and Damon no longer a chasm between two different worlds, but the shared ground of a battlefield where they had just won an impossible victory. They didn't speak. They just sat. Two sentinels watching over the sleeping girl, their silence a comfortable shared language of relief and gratitude. In the quiet hum of the hospital, a new, unconventional family was being forged. 6 months later, the world was painted in the brilliant, warm hues of a late spring afternoon. In the center of Greenstone Park, a flash of blue fabric darted through a field of dandelions. Ivy Lowell, her dark hair flying behind her, chased a yellow butterfly with the kind of boundless, joyful energy that only a healthy 7-year-old can possess. Her cheeks were rosy, her laughter echoed through the trees, and the only sign of her ordeal was a thin, pale scar on her chest, a silver line that mapped the journey back to her life. Damon watched her from a nearby bench, a sketchbook open on his lap. He was no longer a ghost haunting the halls of a skyscraper. He was a man bathed in sunlight. The janitor's uniform had been replaced by a simple t-shirt and jeans, often dusted with the familiar gray of charcoal. He no longer drew in a dusty, hidden basement. His studio was a bright, airy space on the 70th floor of the Cinder Spire, a gift from Elara, with a view that stretched all the way to the horizon. He was preparing for his first gallery exhibition. The exhibition, titled Prayers in Charcoal, was a chronicle of their journey. It featured the raw, desperate portraits from the early days, the hopeful sketches made in secret, and the newer, more confident pieces celebrating Ivy's recovery. It was a story of a father's love, told in 1,000 shades of gray. A shadow fell over his sketchbook. He looked up and smiled. "Leaving the tower before sunset? Who are you and what have you done with my boss?" Elara Winslow smiled back, a genuine, easy expression that now came naturally to her. "The quarterly reports can wait. I was told a certain butterfly chaser might be here." She sat down beside him, her gaze following Ivy's happy dance through the dandelions. The icy armor she had worn for a decade was gone, melted away by the warmth of the last 6 months. She was still a titan of industry, but she was different. The Cinder Spire was no longer just a monument to her ambition. It had become a symbol of community. Inspired by her brother's memory and Damon's art, she had launched the Thomas Winslow Foundation. Its mission was simple: to bring art to children who needed it most. The foundation funded art therapy programs in pediatric hospitals across the state and provided scholarships for talented kids from low-income families, kids who, like Damon, had a voice but no one to hear it. "She looks happy," Elara said softly, watching Ivy. "She is," Damon said, his voice thick with an emotion that was always just beneath the surface. "She's alive, thanks to you. She's alive because you never stopped fighting for her." Elara corrected him gently. "Your drawings, they were a lighthouse in a storm I didn't even know I was lost in." That evening, the gallery was filled with the soft murmur of the city's art community. People moved slowly from one drawing to the next, their expressions a mixture of awe and quiet reverence. Damon, standing awkwardly in a borrowed suit, felt completely out of place until two hands slipped into his. On one side was Ivy, radiant in a blue dress that matched the wings she'd once asked for. On the other was Alara, her presence a calm, steadying force. They stopped in front of the final, central piece of the exhibition. It was the drawing Damon had made in the sub-basement, the one he had poured all of his gratitude into. It was now framed under museum glass, a simple title on a plaque beside it, The Guardian. Ivy looked up at the drawing, then at Alara, a look of dawning recognition on her face. "That's you," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "You're my angel, Alara, the one Daddy told me about." Alara knelt, bringing herself eye level with the little girl. "You're the angel, Ivy," she whispered, her voice catching. "You were the one who taught us all how to fly again." Damon looked at Alara, his heart full. "You didn't just save her life," he said, his voice low and earnest. "You saved mine." Alara stood, her eyes shining as she looked from Damon to Ivy, and then at the drawing that had brought them all together. "You both saved me," she replied. "You reminded me that the strongest things we can ever build aren't made of steel and glass. They're made of hope." They stood there for a long moment, the three of them. A portrait of a family born not from blood, but from a shared journey through the darkness and into the light. The quiet janitor, the powerful CEO, and the little girl who dreamed of butterflies had found in each other a home. And perhaps that is the most beautiful art of all. Not the kind that hangs on a gallery wall, but the kind we create in each other's lives. It's the masterpiece drawn not with charcoal, but with kindness. The one that proves that even in the coldest, most silent of places, a single hidden prayer can be heard, and a single act of seeing someone's pain can be enough to change the world. It reminds us that sometimes our greatest purpose is not to build fortresses to keep the world out, but to find the courage to open a door and let someone else in.